You're listening to Mansplaining Feminism. We had a few issues with the sound recording. I hope you forgive us. Mansplaining Feminism. The idea is that I explain feminism to my good friend Billy, who says he knows nothing. We will go through feminist texts from the 19th century until yesterday. I've studied feminism myself, and that makes me more than qualified to explain everything about it to everyone. Perhaps it is a little arrogant to assume this, but then again, it wouldn't be mansplaining if it wasn't. Today's episode, 19th Century, Declaration of Sentiments, where it all began. Ish. Hi, Billy.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very good now that I'm speaking to you.
Are you ready to be feminized? Feminismized.
I was born ready.
Okay. So do you know what this is about?
I can't say that I do.
So basically,
No.
The idea is, I know a little bit about feminism, which to me is more than enough. So my idea is, I'm going to explain feminism to you, or mansplain feminism to you, since we're two men. I think that's what that means. And basically go through feminist writings from mid-19th century onto yesterday. That's it.
And what's the purpose?
The purpose is me and you will, at the end of this, hopefully become the best feminists.
And the best friends.
And best friends.
Can I just say, just before you begin, just imagine that I am a complete carte blanche of any kind of information regarding feminism. So with me, you need to go really slow, start at the beginning, assume that I know absolutely nothing.
Well, the first thing I'll start with feminism, you said start at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, if you speak to anyone about feminism who know anything about feminism, they will struggle starting from somewhere, right? So you can start with, it depends on who it is. So if you go to different, say, university courses on feminism, each one will start at a different point. So there is no real beginning. The term feminism we used to mean in the early 19th century, just the sort of study of being feminine, how to be woman. And then later on, as the century progressed, it became sort of a word that people fighting for women's rights started using. So even that has no real beginning. So there you go, that's the beginning. There is no beginning. But we're going to start with mid-19th century America. Okay, so the interesting thing that I'll point out to you, something I didn't know, is how closely linked feminist struggles, fighting for women's rights, how closely allied that was with fighting for the removal of slavery, for the abolitionist movement. So they're very, very closely linked. And the first sort of text that I thought we'd start with, sort of looking at very, very a cursory glance at, called the Declaration of Sentiments from 1848. And this was written by three women. One of them is sort of put down as the main writer. Her name was Cady Stanton. Basically, this document is signed by all these people, and it was essentially written in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. But in this one, it starts with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. And then basically it goes through all the different ways that men have ruined the lives of women, and ends with the fact that they shouldn't, because there is no logical reason why they should.
Okay, so it's quite a rational approach, we can say.
Yeah. So it starts with, for example, women have never had the right to vote. They've never had any say in formation of laws, yet they have to follow these laws. They've never been given rights that even the most, and they write, ignorant and degraded men get. They're not allowed entry into politics. And interestingly, which is going to be a common strain in feminism, is when women get married, essentially they are like civilly dead. Even the little rights that they did have sort of get lost in a marriage, because men take all the wages, men have right to all the property. A lot of it comes down to inheritance, where the men get all the inheritance, and all sorts of stuff there. The men are even allowed to discipline their wives, right? Men, I think husbands legally couldn't rape their wives. That wasn't even a possibility legally, as in they had...
And what time period are we speaking about here?
19th century, so this was 1848, but generally okay. 19th century.
So when you're teaching your feminism at university, this would be a very useful and convenient starting point for the kind of evolution or history of feminism.
Yeah, so this
in the West.
Yeah, this is where you would start, because I think you'd have to, if you pretend that you're doing like a feminist course of feminism across the world, you struggle. So it's a very Western phenomena. It doesn't mean that everyone who participated in it were white Western women. In fact, a lot of these people at this time, so a very famous abolitionist lawyer called Frederick Douglass, who is an African American, he was one of the signatories, and he was a man. And a lot of women, famous women, one Sojourner Truth, who was herself a slave and then became free, and she fought for the rights of ex-slaves. She was also part of this movement, the feminist movement. In fact, she said that the feminist movement, women's rights movement, should take precedence over the rights of black people in general. But she's bigger.
And she was a white woman.
She was black, and she was herself a slave, the Sojourner Truth.
Okay.
And she had this. There's a very famous essay or speech that she wrote and gave, which is called "Ain't I a Woman?" So you know how you probably heard the sort of what's it called? The kind of, you're probably familiar with the ways in which women said that their rights were taken away. So women, basically, a lot of these people say that because they didn't have rights, because when they got married, they lost all the sort of rights to do work, any meaningful work, for example. They had to stay home and do nothing and sort of just be pretty, basically, right? So a lot of the ways that feminists or people fighting for women's rights were talking was as if women couldn't really get work, come out of the house, they were protected and all this stuff. So this lady, Sojourner Truth, came out and said, wait a minute, I was a slave. I wasn't told to stay home and look pretty. No one helped me over puddles and, treated me like a lady. They sort of used to kick me and throw me around. So she basically had this very famous speech, which is quite awesome. You should read it if you have time, called Ain't I a Woman? Where she basically says, if that's what you guys are upset with, then what am I? Because I'm not that. No one sort of babied me and stopped me from getting dirty because I'm a woman. I was working since I was born. Well, since I was a child. So that's a very interesting speech.
So her and a number of others, just to summarize so far. So her and a number of other authors, they came together. They wrote this text, which is a series of, which is basically a critique of how women are being treated unfairly in that kind of American context.
Exactly.
So is it like a manifesto where they're offering some kind of... Okay.
It's basically a manifesto. And interestingly, they came together. So this is another link with the abolitionist movement. The whole thing started, apparently, where these women, Mott, Wright and Stanton, these three were going to an abolitionist meeting, and they were stopped at the door because they were women, and they said, oh, sorry, the woman's entrance is there. You have to go to the balcony. This is where the men come in and do the serious sort of fighting slavery. You women can go over there. So that's how it was born. So actually it's very, very linked. It's more linked to the abolitionist movement than I expected it to be. And interestingly, a lot of the people also are against the treatment of Native Americans, Indians. It seems to be another big thing. A lot of the arguments, you said it seems to be rational arguments. A lot of it seems to be religious arguments. So a lot of these women, like Susan B. Anthony, and a big one, Lydia Maria Child, she wrote her books in the 1830s. And she basically, if you read her essays and books, it's basically like quotes from the Bible and then a commentary on that verse saying how this verse shows that that there's no sort of no reason why women should be kept out of public life or shouldn't have equal rights. Adam and Eve tends to be the main part of the Bible where it's shown that women, by being women, sort of fell for Satan's trick, whilst Adam didn't fall for it, and he had to sort of take the fall because of the woman. But she shows through commentary on on the actual text that that's not true, that both parties have equal temptation, and they fall for it in the same way. And so it's very, very religious early on.
But was that just rhetoric because she knew how to appeal to the sentiments of her audience, or was she like a genuinely religious figure and coming from that background and saw this early form of feminism as a genuine religious struggle?
Intentions we can never know, but I think a lot of these women were educated in seminaries. Don't forget, women weren't allowed in at main universities and colleges. So these sort of women seminaries were religious institutions. So they were basically educated in religious institutions sometimes by nuns, right? So her writing and the whole world, even the Native American rights movement and the abolitionist movement, a lot of it was based on religion. The starting point being all humans are created equal by God, and here is some very neat evidence from the Bible. So it starts from there, because a lot of the pro-slavery arguments, don't forget, were also religious, right?
Right.
So the whole thing was marked in religion.
What did they do with this manifesto? Where did they pin it to the door
church
of a church?
door? No,
they fold it into a paper aeroplane and
threw it at every man who walked past. Apparently, basically, they published it and they got ridiculed massively for it, particularly the right to vote stuff. That was a big no. That was
Who did they get ridiculed by? Just men or men in? I mean, do we have any kind of information on that?
Not specifically, particularly by the mainstream political strata of society. So in terms of newspaper op-eds, politicians, journalists, writers, as a general societal whole, there was such a big backlash against this that some people removed the signature or fought the part of the women's vote aspect of it. I don't think many people really rationally could argue against women having the same rights in terms of legal rights and the fact that they should be able to vote, work. But I think voting-wise was a big problem. I'm not sure why. It's interesting, Frederick Douglass' argument for that. He says, even if you don't agree with anything, seeing that male governments of the world have failed, it can't do any harm to try the experiment of a government by man and woman united. He basically says, like, even if you're right and women are rubbish, let's assume, why can't we just try it out? Because clearly we haven't done a great job.
I like that. I like this Frederick Douglass guy.
Yeah, he's quite a cool guy. Look him up. He looks awesome. He looks like a lion.
Frederick Douglass. He doesn't play by the rules, but he gets results.
He does get results. That's it. That's a general overview of the early feminist movement.
Okay, so we got manifesto, negative reaction. What happens next?
You saw that it's basically quite practical, right? So the arguments are, there's no rational argument, no religious argument, no logical argument, nothing really that says that women aren't equal. So why can't we go out and work and get salaries and inherit stuff and so on and so forth, right? So that's the general argument. So we want to get out and we want to get involved. So we're going to jump next episode to Simone de Beauvoir. It's a jump of probably 100 years. But Simone de Beauvoir wrote what some people call the feminist Bible, called The Second Sex. And her thing is not necessarily a critique of what women can't do in society, because by then they can do a lot of the stuff that the first sort of group were fighting for. But she basically says that language itself is sexist. The way we speak, the way we write, the way we do science, the way we do psychology, the very way we conceptualize what women are is what is sexist. She goes through famously how procreation is described, how the sperm goes for the egg, whilst the egg is this passive thing and the sperm's like, yeah, let's go, let's do this. That's literally where sexism starts, from the very description of how life is created. That
sounds very familiar.
Yeah, we're getting closer to how it's seen now.
To the criticism that I've received personally.
Yeah, people criticize you for having sexist language.
Sexist language, useless sperm, so many things.
Yes. Okay, it's awesome though. I'm glad we started it off. So I'll see you next episode.
I'm very excited for next week.
Smashed it.